for English 101. We are going to talk about some housekeeping things, as we say, and then I want to tell you a little bit about the second paper and our assignment from the MLA handbook. I think that the reading has been very minimal for this course. I may work on that for next semester. And I want you to see how little time you're spending reading, and please spend the time on the papers because they count so much. And because that's the most important thing, this course is about writing. The rewrites are in for paper 1, and I am going to get them graded today or tomorrow. I've just got a few left. And one of the things that's happening, by the way, I had a paper that was late. It wasn't sent late. I just couldn't open it. And I finally got it this morning where I could open it, and I graded it and sent it back. And that person has a week, so don't panic if you're listening to this tape. I wanted to talk about the mid-term grades. Maysville Community and Technical College started instituting midterm grades last semester, I think, or the semester before. And one of the things I want to warn you is that that grade is not your final grade, and it's not a promise. If you have a B, that doesn't mean you're going to have a B at the end of the semester. You have to keep working. If you have an E, that doesn't mean you're going to have an E at the end of the semester. It means that you need to get to work so that you can improve your grades, okay? Work on the papers. Use the examples. Most of the E's are just the works cited page is not done right, nobody really cares, and that's what happens with the E's. You have to follow the directions. Follow the directions. Use your sample paper. Use the sample paper on OWL, the Online Writing Lab of Purdue University. I'm going to use that a whole lot more next semester. I think we need to really push that because they have the MLA, the new MLA that's in your MLA book, and it's much easier to use. The MLA book, I think, is very confusing. Okay, enough on that. Now, to get your midterm grade, there are, I have just counted them up myself. Please do not trust Blackboard. They've got some incredible number of points that are just not there. The total number of points after the grading of paper 1 is 490 points. That is the number of points that were assigned to every student. Now, if you didn't do an exercise, it will say that you just have so many points that you tried. Well, that's not enough. It's what everybody had available, 490 points. So you can take the number of points you have and divide it by 490. Use your cell phone or whatever. Do it in your head. It's pretty easy. And that is the midterm grade. Okay? I also wanted to say, and I hate to say this, but truth is truth, the drop add date, where you can drop at your own discretion, is the 6th of March, the first day of spring break. After 4:30 on March the 6th, you can no longer drop at your own discretion. By the way, you can't drop over the internet either. You have to do it, I think. You can't just drop. You have to come in. After the drop add date, midterm, March the 6th, I will not just let you drop with a W. Okay? So you can drop at your own discretion up until that time and receive the grade of W, which will not affect your GPA. Okay, after that, it's the grade you've got. And if you haven't written all 3 papers, remember, as it says in the syllabus, you flunked the course. You have to write all 3 papers. Okay, I want to just hold this up for you. This is the calendar of assignments, and I know I sound like I'm haranguing. I feel a little haranguey this morning. If you don't follow this, you can't take this course. Get it out. Look at it. Mine is, I put it in plastic and all that kind of stuff. I'm assigning paper 2. It will be up on the website today. And the due date is at the bottom of the page, which is paper 2 is due the 24th of March. The works cited page is due March 17th. So there is plenty of time to do your research, to look things up, to do your interviews, talk to people, and get this paper done. These papers are enormously important. Okay. Now, we have done the Stephen King up to, I think, let's see, where are we? Anyway, you should read Stephen King up to page 107, I believe. Yes, page 107. You should have read that far in the Stephen King book, this book. That is on your final exam, okay? The Stephen King book is the final exam. So, you've got to get to work, folks. You've got to get to work. If you're not going to read this book, you're not going to do well in this course. I have several people making 100s on the Stephen King quizzes, and I have, unfortunately, several people not even passing them. They're simple questions, okay? And by the way, the quiz over this lecture will be up today. Okay, let's talk just quickly about this MLA book and the assignment that you have, which is over to page 101, but I may not go that far today because that's a lot. And this is, remember, simple stuff. You do not have to memorize anything from this book. All you have to do is know where to look it up, okay? But you do have to look it up. All right, on page 61, they talk about using someone's name. I'm going to skip a lot of stuff and tell you what's useful and what isn't, so I suggest you write down some page numbers or get your book out and highlight or write in it or put sticky notes or something. When you use someone's name the first time, you use their entire name. So if it's Stephen King, you say Stephen King. From then on, you may say King, as it says at the top of page 62. You may use the family name. Please do that also with women. This is one of the things people say, oh, Emily wrote this. No, Emily Dickinson wrote this. And then after that, Dickinson believes, Dickinson writes, whatever. Give women the same respect, please, that you give men. Okay, I teach women's studies too, if you'd like to take that. Okay, do not use titles in your paper. Don't use titles in the works cited page. So Dr. Martha Bone, nah. Just at the top of the first page where you tell who the faculty member is, there you use doctor. After that, don't use titles. Don't say sir. Don't say madam, Sir Paul McCartney, Sir Elton John. Both of them have been knighted by the Queen, but that's not the point. Leave them out. Now, the one exception to that to me is president. So you would always write President Obama, President Eisenhower, President Roosevelt. Okay. A title is not included if it's saint, doctor, any of those things. Now, this is me. In the text of your paper, you might want to give authority to your quotation. So you might say, if you're writing about farming, fact factory farming. You might write that John Smith, who has farmed in Kentucky for 30 years, comma, that gives authority to what he says. It's not just old John Smith you met somewhere. It's a man who's worked at this job you're writing about, at farming for 30 years. It gives authority to your paper. If you're going to quote a teacher, you might say he has taught for 5 years, or he's taught in 3 different school districts or something to give authority to what you're saying. You can include that at your own discretion. You want to be careful about it. They use saints. Don't you give me the saints. It's, as they say at the bottom of page 62, common to use certain names. Madonna. I always think of various singers, but they give you the examples of Dante. I like Dante's whole name, Dante Alighieri, because it's so Italian. Shakespeare, of course, you don't have to say William Shakespeare. There's only one Shakespeare. Okay. Molière. They talk about George Eliot, and I always have to tell students, Marianne Evans has a pen name, or an alias, George Eliot, just as Molière does. And, of course, Samuel Langhorne Clemens is Mark Twain, names they used when they were writing. I was always taught that George Eliot used the name George Eliot. Marianne Evans used the name George Eliot because she was a woman, and then you think of Jane Austen, who published under her own name. So it's not just because she was a woman. George Eliot was living with a married man who was a Roman Catholic. It was a great scandal, and her book simply wouldn't have been published at the time because it was so well known about her living situation. Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain means Mark II, and about the deepness of the river, and he got his name from there. So I'm not sure. I like Langhorne also. Anyway, I'm completely off the subject. Okay, 63 and following, just skip all that. That is foreign names and phrases which you will use when you're in graduate school, but not in English 101. Capitalization and punctuation on page 67. These are just basic rules you probably learned in the 5th grade. And then at the bottom of page 68 is italics and quotation marks. And it's a simple rule. If something is a thing in itself, like the New York Times, the Maysville Ledger Independent, Seinfeld, the name of a movie, La La Land, which did not win the Academy Award. Those things are in italics. We used to underline them back in the day, but now we don't use underlining. It's italics. Those are things in themselves, a volume you can put up. Stephen King's On Writing. And then, for things that are a part of something else, for example, an article in the newspaper, that's put in quotation marks. An episode of Seinfeld is put in quotation marks. Part of a movie, an essay from a book is put in quotation marks. And one of the best examples we can use in this class is High Tide in Tucson. Now, some of you had a horrible time finding this. The truth is, if you put the quotation marks around it, when you typed it into Google, when you Googleized it, as my Mr. Klee, who teaches history here, says, if you Googleize it, put the quotation marks, and the essay comes up. If you just type in High Tide in Tucson, the book will come up because they had the same name. High Tide in Tucson is an essay from the book High Tide in Tucson. So that makes it, you have to get the quotation marks right. Okay, then they have titles within titles on page 71. You might want to look at that if you end up with, what do I put? Quotation marks, underlining. Romeo and Juliet would be italicized, but you might use that in a title, in an article. By the way, never put your own title in quotation marks, and don't quote yourself. Okay, languages other than English, you can skip that. On page 75, the use and accuracy of quotations. If you put a quotation in quotation marks, it has to be exactly. If you're paraphrasing, you can't just change a word or two. You have to rewrite the thing in your own words. Now, they give you at the bottom of page 75, I want to make sure I don't go over where you're supposed to be. Okay. If a prose quotation is 4 lines or less, you just put it in quotation marks. If it's longer than that, you double indent it 10 spaces. The best example of that is on page 77, where you see those 2 large indented quotation. And they tell you if if your sentence ends in quotation marks, put the parentheses before the period. Otherwise, it's just out there somewhere in your paper. Okay? If it's more than 4 lines in the text, block indent it. Block indent is at the top of page 77. Okay. Poetry is put into your paper just in quotation marks, a line of poetry, just like you do prose. When you are quoting more than 1 line of poetry, you put a slash mark between the lines to show that there's a line break there. If it's a stanza break, you put 2 slanted lines. That's at the bottom of page 77. I'm not sure we're going to be writing much about poetry, but it's right there. It's right there. If it's a stanza break. If there are more than 3 lines of poetry, you should put that out in a block. Sometimes you have to cite the lines. For example, the Iliad and the Odyssey are poetry. And of course, you're reading in translation, but it's still poetry. So you have to put the slant marks. You might have to put the line numbers because it's a whole book of poetry. So the Iliad and the Odyssey would be italicized, the names, because they are a whole book in themselves. And then you would probably have to put either the stanza, the canto, however it's divided. Spenser is in cantos. The Iliad and the Odyssey are in most translations, are in chapters, and they give you the line number. If there's a line number, you've got to give it in your text. Okay. And then we have E.E. Cummings on page 79. I wanted to tell you a little bit about that because E.E. Cummings didn't capitalize his own name. He didn't capitalize. I mean, there's 1 capital letter in this poem, but you don't capitalize it. But he didn't capitalize his name, and you do capitalize that. That was his thing, but you always put E.E. Cummings, capital E, capital C. And this poem is just, I think, a hoot. It's about a carefree scene in the spring. It's spring, and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee. And then the line numbers are given to you. I don't know why he capitalized man, and I surely can't figure out goat-footed unless he's supposed to be a sartor like in Greek mythology. But whatever. Interesting stuff there. These rules don't have to be memorized. Look them up. Now, okay, so we're to page 80, drama, and like Romeo and Juliet, or Moonlight, the movie that did win the Academy Award. All of those are in italics because drama is usually published in little books for the actors. Now, I want to show you something in this book. I hope you know about this, but I'm telling you now, if you don't. There's this thing in the back called an index. You can look any of these things up in the index and not have to read every word of every, you're looking up how to do numbers in in-text citations. It's right here on page 140. It's in alphabetical order. I looked it up. If I want to know parts of poetry, it tells me where to look it up. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to memorize anything. You just have to know where to look it up. Okay. I would like for you, that's where I'm gone here. We're finished with that up to page 180, I think, or 80, whatever it is. 180. No, 80. Wow. It's Monday morning, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Stephen King book just because I've got some time. I assigned this book because Stephen King, to me, speaks to us so much. He came from a single-parent family. His father left them with nothing, took all the money, left them with debts. His mother had very little education. It was the 1950s. Women weren't expected to work outside the home. And after the Second World War, when women built airplanes and tanks and guns and filled the factories, and it was amazing, the production during the Second World War, and it was primarily due to women because the men were all fighting. But at the end of the war, the men came home and all the women were summarily fired. You got to take my women's studies course. Anyway, I think about Stephen King. He is the best there is at what he does. He is the best there is at what he does. You can hardly turn on the TV without seeing some program of his. I mentioned the Green Mile in class the other day, and students said, "That's Stephen King?" Yes, that's Stephen King. He has written so many movies are based on his books. He has written television shows, short stories. You can't turn on the TV, go to the movies, go to a bookstore without seeing Stephen King. And yet he started out as the son of a single parent who had virtually no money, who worked at minimum wage jobs for years. He was sick for much of his childhood. He had to work in horrible places when he was in high school and college just to pay his expenses. And then he had all of those rejection slips that he put up on a nail in the ceiling. And yet, he is an American success story. He had talent, which is given sparingly to people, and he was born with that talent. There is no question about that. But as he says in his book, you cannot make a great writer, but you can make a bad writer into a good writer. So we're none of us going to be as talented as Stephen King, but we can be good writers. But I think his lesson is you can be good at whatever it is you do. He had virtually nothing financially. He didn't live in a mansion. He lived in rented apartments, some of them in the worst parts of town. They didn't have all of the clothes and goods and things that we take for granted. And yet, he has made a great success of his life because he has worked hard. He hadn't just sat back and said, "Well, I don't need to do that." I think of him like I think of many of my students. I'm not unaware. I know that most of our students come in the door and turn on the computer feeling desperate. Because we have families, we have money problems, our cars are breaking down, people are sick. And yet we get up in the morning and we take a step. We put one foot in front of the other. To me, that's the lesson of the Stephen King book. I'm going to send you a quotation. I thought I had it right here, but I don't. Nuts. Anyway, I'll look for those little quotation cards and send them to you. Anyway, get to work on paper 2. If you haven't read Stephen King, start reading. Start reading. This is a book that's funny, has something to say to you, and has great lessons. And I'll stop preaching. Thank you.